February 23, 1945. Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands. The 70-pound flamethrower dug into Corporal Hershel Williams' shoulders as he crouched behind a demolished tank, watching Japanese machine gun fire tear across the black volcanic sand. His entire 6-man demolition team lay dead or wounded behind him. The 4 riflemen assigned to cover him were all that remained between Williams and the 7 reinforced concrete pillboxes ahead, each spitting death at 300 rounds per minute. At 5 feet 6 inches tall and 150 pounds, Williams looked like a boy playing soldier with equipment designed for larger men. His hands, calloused from years driving trucks and taxis through West Virginia's mountain roads, gripped the flamethrower's wand with surprising steadiness for a man about to attempt what his company commander had just called a suicide mission. The radio had crackled with desperate orders minutes earlier. American tanks were stuck, unable to advance through the network of buried mines and concrete fortifications. Infantry couldn't move forward without being slaughtered. Someone needed to eliminate those pillboxes with a flamethrower. Williams had simply said, "I'll try." What none of the Japanese defenders knew as they poured fire from their impregnable positions was that they were about to encounter a dairy farmer's son from Quiet Dell, West Virginia, who would spend the next 4 hours performing one of the most extraordinary individual combat actions in Marine Corps history. By the time the black volcanic sand stopped smoking, Hershel Williams would have destroyed 7 enemy pillboxes, used 6 different flamethrowers, made countless trips through enemy fire to resupply, and opened a path for his entire company to advance. The boy who had been rejected by the Marines for being too short would earn the nation's highest military decoration. But on that morning, as machine gun bullets ricocheted off his compressed air, tanks, Williams wasn't thinking about medals or heroism. He was thinking about the Marines pinned down behind him, the men dying in the volcanic sand, and whether he could crawl close enough to that first pillbox before a Japanese gunner put a bullet through his skull. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Hershel Woodrow Williams was born on October 2, 1923, in Quiet Dell, Marion County, West Virginia, a farming community southeast of Fairmont where nothing much happened and everyone knew everyone's business. He arrived into this world weighing just 3.5 pounds, so small that his mother Lorena didn't expect him to survive. For several days, the family waited to see if the tiny infant would live long enough to justify a name. When the doctor finally arrived at their remote dairy farm days after the birth, Lorena decided to name her youngest child after him, Hershel Woodrow Williams. It was a name suggesting respectability and education, aspirations for a child born into hard-scrabble rural poverty during an era when infant mortality remained tragically common. Hershel was the youngest of 11 children born to Lloyd and Lorena Williams. 6 of his siblings had already died in the 1918 influenza epidemic that swept through Appalachia like a scythe through wheat. The Williams family understood death intimately. They understood hard work even better. Lloyd Williams operated a small dairy farm, the kind of marginal agricultural operation that kept a family fed but rarely prosperous. The work was relentless and unforgiving. Cows needed milking twice daily regardless of weather, illness, or exhaustion. Hay needed cutting and baling. Fences needed mending. Equipment needed constant repair with improvised parts because new components cost money the family didn't possess. Young Hershel grew up, understanding that survival required working harder than you wanted, longer than you thought possible, and never complaining because complaining changed nothing. The dairy farm taught him lessons no classroom could provide. He learned that animals depended entirely on human care, that neglecting duty meant suffering and death for creatures under your protection. He learned that some tasks were terrifying but necessary, that fear was acceptable but cowardice was not. He learned that exhaustion was temporary but character was permanent. These lessons would prove useful on Iwo Jima. When Hershel was 11 years old, Lloyd Williams suffered a massive heart attack and died. The death shattered the family's already precarious economic situation. Without Lloyd, the dairy farm operation became nearly impossible to sustain. The older Williams children had already left home, pursuing whatever work they could find during the Great Depression. The farm responsibilities fell on those who remained, including young Hershel, who suddenly found himself assuming adult burdens while still a child. The loss of his father taught Hershel another lesson. Life was brutally unfair, but you kept working anyway. The cows still needed milking. The family still needed feeding. Grief was a luxury they couldn't afford. He developed the stoic resilience characteristic of rural Americans during the Depression, the ability to absorb devastating blows and continue functioning because stopping meant starvation. Hershel attended school in Fairmont, West Virginia, but his education was secondary to farm survival. He completed some high school but never graduated, leaving at 17 to find work that actually paid money rather than producing food for subsistence. His departure wasn't a choice reflecting academic failure or lack of intelligence. It was simple economic necessity. The family needed cash income, and school provided none. In 1940, 17-year-old Hershel joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, one of President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs that provided employment for young men from impoverished families. The CCC sent enrollees to remote camps where they performed conservation work, building trails, fighting forest fires, constructing facilities in national parks and forests. The program paid $30 monthly, of which $25 was automatically sent home to the enrollee's family. For Hershel, the CCC represented adventure beyond West Virginia's mountains. He was assigned to a camp in Montana, 800 miles from everything he'd ever known. The work was demanding, the conditions Spartan, but Hershel adapted easily. Farm labor had prepared him for physical hardship. The CCC's structured environment taught him to follow orders, work within a team, and accept discipline without resentment. On December 7, 1941, Hershel Williams was in Montana when news arrived that Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. The announcement meant little initially. Hershel, like most working-class Americans, possessed limited knowledge of international affairs or the complex diplomatic failures leading to war. He knew nothing about Japanese expansion in China, America's oil embargo, or the deteriorating relations between Washington and Tokyo. What he understood was simpler. America had been attacked, Americans had been killed, his country was at war. The Williams family's response was immediate and unanimous. Two of Hershel's older brothers enlisted in the United States Army. Military service represented duty, patriotism, and continuation of American traditions reaching back to the Revolution. When your country called, you answered. No questions, no hesitation, no excuses. But Hershel Williams didn't want the army. He had a different service in mind, inspired by the most superficial possible reason: uniforms. Two young Marines from the Fairmont area had enlisted before Pearl Harbor. When they returned home on leave, they wore their dress blue uniforms, the iconic Marine Corps outfit featuring a dark blue coat with red trim, khaki shirt, and white cover. The uniform was striking, dignified, unmistakably military. Marines wearing dress blues commanded attention and respect. Young women noticed them, other men deferred to them. By contrast, the Army's standard uniform in 1941 was brown wool, a drab, practical outfit that Hershel considered the ugliest thing he'd ever seen. He later recalled his thinking with characteristic bluntness. That brown wool uniform was the ugliest thing in town. I decided I did not want to be in that thing. I wanted to be in those dress blues. This reasoning was absurd by any rational standard. Choosing a military branch based on uniform aesthetics rather than mission, training, or tradition seemed frivolous, even childish. But Hershel was 19 years old, from a small town, and possessed limited understanding of military life beyond what he saw at home. The dress blues looked sharp. That was sufficient reason to want the Marine Corps. In November 1942, shortly after turning 19, Hershel went to the Marine Corps recruiter in Fairmont, ready to enlist, serve his country, and wear those magnificent dress blues. He filled out the preliminary paperwork, answered questions about his health and background, and prepared for the medical examination. Then the recruiter measured his height, 5 feet 6 inches. The recruiter's expression conveyed the news before he spoke. The Marine Corps maintained a minimum height requirement of 5 feet 8 inches. Hershel Williams was 2 inches too short for service. No exceptions, no waivers, no appeals. The Corps needed tall men who could carry heavy equipment, project physical presence, and meet the image standards the Marines maintained with fierce pride. Sorry, son. Try the Army. Hershel left the recruiting office devastated. His brothers were serving, his country was at war. He'd been rejected for being too short, a circumstance entirely beyond his control. He couldn't make himself taller any more than he could reverse his birthday. The rejection felt like being declared unfit, inadequate, unworthy of serving beside other American men his age. He returned to civilian work, driving a taxi in Fairmont on the 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. night shift, ferrying drunks, shift workers, and people with emergencies around the small city. The work paid decently but felt meaningless compared to military service. Hershel also sometimes delivered Western Union telegrams, including the dreaded messages informing families that their sons or husbands had been killed in action. Those deliveries haunted him. The minute families saw that Western Union envelope, they knew. Mothers would scream or collapse, fathers would stand frozen, unable to process the words. Wives would sob so violently they couldn't breathe. Hershel was 18 years old, delivering the worst news human beings could receive. With no training in grief counselling and no words adequate to the moment, he would hand over the telegram, mumble condolences, and leave as quickly as possible, carrying the family's anguish with him. The experience gave Hershel profound appreciation for military sacrifice and deep respect for families who lost loved ones in service. He understood viscerally what war cost, not in abstract strategic terms, but in shattered mothers weeping in doorways at 2 a.m. The memory would influence him for the rest of his life. Then, in early 1943, circumstances changed. The Marine Corps was suffering heavy casualties across the Pacific Theater. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and countless smaller engagements were consuming manpower faster than recruiting could replace losses. The Corps faced a choice: maintain arbitrary height standards or accept slightly shorter men who were otherwise qualified. In March 1943, the Marine Corps reduced its minimum height requirement. Men as short as 5 feet 6 inches would now be accepted for enlistment, provided they met all other physical and mental standards. When Hershel learned the news, he immediately returned to the Fairmont recruiting office. On May 26, 1943, Hershel Woodrow Williams enlisted in the United States Marine Corps Reserve in Charleston, West Virginia. He was 19 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighed 150 pounds, and knew absolutely nothing about the Marine Corps beyond their dress blue uniforms. He had no understanding of Marine Corps history, traditions, or the brutal combat awaiting him in the Pacific. He simply wanted to serve his country and wear those impressive dress blues. What Hershel Williams didn't know was that he would rarely wear dress blues during his service. Combat Marines wore utility uniforms, olive drab or camouflage, designed for function rather than appearance. The magnificent dress blues he'd admired existed primarily for ceremonial occasions, recruiting posters, and home leave. In the Pacific, Hershel would wear sweat-soaked utilities, carry 70 pounds of flamethrower equipment, and crawl through volcanic sand under enemy fire. The uniform wouldn't be impressive, the work would be terrifying, but he would prove that courage had nothing to do with height, background, or education. Boot camp transformed Hershel Williams from a West Virginia farm boy into a United States Marine. The training occurred at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, California, a facility Marines called Hollywood for its proximity to the film industry. The nickname was ironic. Nothing about boot camp resembled Hollywood glamour. The training was designed to break recruits mentally and physically, then rebuild them according to Marine Corps specifications. The transformation was systematic and brutal. Drill instructors screamed obscenities inches from recruits' faces, punished entire platoons for individual failures, and maintained relentless physical and psychological pressure that left grown men weeping with exhaustion and frustration. Recruits learned to march in formation, shoot rifles with precision, maintain equipment to exacting standards, and obey orders instantly and without question. The experience was designed to eliminate individualism and create cohesion. Marines didn't fight as individuals. They fought as units, with each man performing his assigned function and trusting others to perform theirs. The drill instructors' abuse wasn't sadism, it was technique. They were creating warriors who would function under conditions far worse than anything boot camp could simulate. Hershel endured boot camp with typical stoic determination. The physical challenges were demanding but manageable. Farm work had prepared him for exhaustion and discomfort. The psychological pressure was harder. Having your intelligence questioned, your manhood doubted, and your competence ridiculed by men who seemed to genuinely despise you required mental toughness beyond physical strength. Some recruits broke under the pressure. Hershel simply absorbed it and continued. After boot camp, Hershel received advanced infantry training, learning squad tactics, weapon maintenance, and combat procedures. Unlike most Marines who were assigned to rifle companies, Hershel was transferred to a tank battalion for specialized training. Then, recognizing his mechanical aptitude and steady temperament, instructors reassigned him again to demolition training. Demolition Marines performed specialized tasks, requiring technical knowledge and nerves of steel. They cleared mines, destroyed enemy fortifications with explosives, and operated flamethrowers against bunkers and caves. The training emphasized practical skills rather than theoretical knowledge. Instructors taught Hershel how flamethrowers functioned mechanically, how to maintain them under field conditions, and how to employ them tactically against fortified positions. The M22 flamethrower Hershel would carry in combat was a sophisticated weapon despite its primitive appearance. It consisted of 2 cylindrical fuel tanks and 1 compressed gas tank, all welded together into a backpack frame weighing approximately 70 pounds when fully loaded. The fuel tanks contained 4.5 gallons of flammable mixture, typically equal parts diesel fuel and high-octane gasoline. This combination provided the heat of gasoline with the carrying power of heavier diesel. The compressed gas tank, filled with nitrogen rather than flammable compressed air, provided pressure to propel the fuel mixture through a flexible hose to a 3-foot wand. The wand featured an ignition system using phosphorus pellets that ignited the fuel as it left the nozzle. When operated properly, the weapon projected burning fuel 20 to 30 yards, creating a rolling ball of flame that could flow around corners, through openings, and into caves or bunkers. Training emphasized fuel conservation. A fully loaded flamethrower contained only 72 seconds of fuel at maximum flow. Operators learned to fire short bursts of 2 to 5 seconds, maximizing effective time. Instructors also taught survival techniques. Flamethrower operators were prominent targets on any battlefield. The weapon was distinctive, visible, and terrifying. Enemy soldiers concentrated fire on flamethrower operators, knowing that eliminating them removed the one weapon capable of destroying fortified positions. The instructor's advice was simple. Crawl as close to the target as possible before firing. The closer the operator, the more effective the weapon and the harder for defenders to hit him without exposing themselves. After firing, immediately move. Never fire from the same position twice. If possible, approach targets from unexpected angles, using terrain for concealment. And never, ever assume a position was clear just because it stopped firing. Hershel absorbed the training with characteristic seriousness. He didn't romanticize the flamethrower or view it as an adventure. He understood it was necessary for destroying enemy positions that would otherwise kill Marines. The weapon's gruesome effects troubled him. Burning men alive was horrific, but allowing those men to kill Marines with machine guns was worse. War forced impossible choices. Hershel learned to make them. On October 30th, 1943, Hershel shipped out to the Pacific Theater aboard the troopship MS Welty Redden. The voyage from California to New Caledonia took weeks, crossing thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean, while submarines prowled beneath and Japanese aircraft searched above. The troopship was crowded, hot, miserable, and boring. Thousands of Marines packed below decks with minimal fresh air, terrible food, and nothing to do except wait, sleep, and imagine what combat would be like. Most Marines aboard the Welty Redden had never experienced combat. They had heard stories from veterans returning from Guadalcanal and Tarawa, tales of brutal fighting, heavy casualties, and enemy soldiers who fought with fanatical determination. The stories were simultaneously exciting and terrifying, promising glory and threatening death in equal measure. Hershel listened to the veterans but didn't dwell on their stories. He couldn't control what awaited him in the Pacific. Worrying about it changed nothing. He focused instead on practical matters, maintaining his equipment, studying demolition procedures, and preparing mentally for whatever came next. This pragmatic approach would characterize his entire military service. The Welty Redden arrived in New Caledonia, a French colonial island in the South Pacific that served as a major American staging base. In January 1944, Hershel was assigned to Company C, 1st Battalion, 21st Marine Regiment, 3rd Marine Division. The 3rd Marine Division was a veteran combat unit that had fought at Bougainville and was preparing for future operations against Japanese-held islands. Hershel joined Company C at Guadalcanal, the Solomon Islands campaign that had concluded months earlier with American victory after 6 months of brutal combat. Guadalcanal was now secure, transformed into a major American base with airfields, supply depots, and training facilities. Here, Hershel trained with his new unit, learning how the company operated, developing relationships with fellow Marines, and preparing for his first combat operation. In July 1944, the 3rd Marine Division participated in the recapture of Guam, an American territory seized by Japan in December 1941. The Guam operation was Hershel Williams' first experience with combat, and it was everything the veterans had described: chaos, terror, violence, and confusion beyond anything training could simulate. Japanese defenders fought from fortified positions, resisting with suicidal determination. Hershel's job was straightforward but horrifying. Locate enemy bunkers and pillboxes, approach under covering fire from riflemen, project burning fuel into openings, killing defenders inside. Move to the next position. Repeat until your fuel was exhausted or you were killed. The work was more difficult and terrifying than any training exercise. Real bullets snapped past his head, real explosions threw volcanic rock and shrapnel. Real men screamed as fire consumed them, but Hershel discovered something unexpected during the Guam campaign. He could function under fire. Fear was constant and overwhelming, but it didn't paralyze him. His hands remained steady. His mind stayed focused. He performed his duties with mechanical precision, despite terror threatening to overwhelm his consciousness. The farm boy from West Virginia possessed natural courage he hadn't known existed. The Guam operation lasted from July 21st to August 10th, 1944. American forces secured the island after brutal fighting that cost thousands of casualties on both sides. Hershel survived without serious injury, though the psychological impact was profound. He had killed men, burned them alive with his weapon, heard their screams, and witnessed death in forms he could never have imagined in Quiet Dell. After Guam, the 3rd Marine Division returned to training areas to rest, absorb replacements for casualties, and prepare for future operations. Veterans like Hershel now trained newer Marines, sharing tactical lessons learned through combat experience. They emphasized the importance of suppressing fire, the necessity of teamwork, and the reality that flamethrower operators rarely survived multiple campaigns. That grim statistic was accurate. Flamethrower operators suffered casualty rates far exceeding ordinary infantry. They were targeted relentlessly by enemy fire, carried equipment that was visible and distinctive, and had to approach within point-blank range to be effective. Most flamethrower operators were killed or severely wounded within their first few missions. Hershel had survived Guam. His odds of surviving a second major operation were considerably worse. But statistics didn't matter. The Marine Corps needed flamethrower operators. Hershel was trained, experienced, and willing. When the 3rd Marine Division received orders for Operation Detachment, the assault on Iwo Jima, Corporal Hershel Williams would go ashore with his flamethrower, ready to perform whatever the Marine Corps required. He had no way of knowing that Iwo Jima would test him beyond anything experienced at Guam. No way of knowing that February 23rd, 1945, would transform him from an ordinary Marine into an American legend. No way of knowing that his actions would save hundreds of American lives and earn him the Medal of Honor. He simply knew his duty, and intended to perform it to the best of his ability, regardless of consequences. The boy who had been rejected for being too short was about to prove that heroism measured character, not height. Iwo Jima was unlike any island the Americans had yet encountered in the Pacific War. 8 square miles of volcanic rock shaped like a pork chop, the island rose from the ocean 750 miles south of Tokyo. It was Japanese home territory, part of the Tokyo prefecture itself, the first piece of Japan proper that American forces would assault. The Japanese had transformed it into the most heavily fortified position in the Pacific. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi commanded the defense. Unlike other Japanese commanders who favored suicidal banzai charges and fighting on the beaches, Kuribayashi planned a war of attrition. He would let the Americans land unopposed, then kill them slowly from prepared positions inland. He had spent months constructing an elaborate underground fortress, 18 miles of tunnels connecting over 800 pillboxes, blockhouses, and artillery positions. Kuribayashi's pillboxes were engineering marvels. Reinforced concrete walls 3 feet thick, interlocking fields of fire providing mutual support, hidden entrances and exits through the tunnel system, steel doors protecting gun ports. Many positions were sited in reverse slope positions, invisible from the sea, impossible to hit with naval gunfire. The Japanese could fire from these positions, then retreat through tunnels and reoccupy them after Americans thought they were cleared. The entire island was designed to kill. Every approach was covered by multiple weapons. Every ravine was a death trap. Every cave was a fortress. Kuribayashi had told his 21,000 defenders that they would not leave the island alive. Each man was expected to kill 10 Americans before dying. Victory was impossible. Honorable death defending the Emperor's territory was certain. American planners anticipated 3 to 5 days of fighting to secure Iwo Jima. They were catastrophically WTUS wrong. The assault began at 9 a.m. on February 19, 1945. The 4th and 5th Marine Divisions landed on the southeastern beaches, while the 3rd Marine Division remained in reserve aboard ships offshore. The first waves encountered minimal resistance, precisely as Kuribayashi planned. Marines struggled inland through volcanic sand so fine it swallowed men to their knees, making every step exhausting. Then Kuribayashi's artillery opened fire. Hidden guns on Mount Suribachi and in the northern highlands bracketed the beaches with devastating accuracy. Mortars rained down, exploding among tightly packed Marines. Machine guns fired from invisible positions. Within hours, American casualties were staggering. The beaches became slaughterhouses, but the Marines kept advancing. They always advanced. That was the Marine Corps way, forward movement regardless of casualties. Take ground, hold ground, die if necessary but never retreat. By nightfall of D-Day, the Americans controlled small sections of beach and had begun moving inland. Casualties exceeded 2,400. The Japanese had barely begun fighting. February 20th brought continued grinding advances. Marines attacked pillboxes individually, using flamethrowers, demolitions, and grenades to clear each position while enduring fire from positions they couldn't see. Progress measured in yards cost dozens of lives. The volcanic sand absorbed artillery impact, reducing effectiveness. Only direct assault with flamethrowers or demolition charges could destroy the concrete fortifications. On February 21st, as fighting continued ashore, the 3rd Marine Division began landing. Among the thousands of Marines coming ashore was Corporal Hershel Williams, carrying his flamethrower equipment and wondering if he would survive the day. The black volcanic sand felt alien beneath Williams's boots as he waded ashore. The beach was chaos. Destroyed landing craft littered the shoreline, wounded. Marines waited for evacuation. Artillery fire exploded randomly. Overhead, American aircraft strafed Japanese positions, while naval guns pounded the northern highlands. The noise was overwhelming, a physical assault on the senses that made thinking difficult. Williams' company moved inland, passing destroyed Japanese positions and American dead covered with ponchos. The smell was unforgettable: cordite, volcanic sulfur, burning gasoline, and rotting flesh. Nothing in training or Guam had prepared him for the industrial scale of death on Iwo Jima. This wasn't battle. This was mechanized slaughter. The 3rd Marine Division was assigned to the center of the American line, tasked with advancing north across the island's narrowest point. The terrain was nightmarish, deep ravines cut by ancient lava flows, jagged rocks providing perfect cover for defenders, countless caves and tunnels allowing Japanese troops to appear anywhere, anytime. Every 100 yards of advance required hours of combat and cost dozens of casualties. Williams quickly learned that Iwo Jima was unlike Guam. At Guam, the Japanese had eventually been overwhelmed by American firepower. Here, they seemed inexhaustible. Clear a pillbox, and it would be reoccupied hours later through underground tunnels. Kill the defenders in one position, and fire would immediately come from another. The Japanese fought with suicidal determination, often continuing to fire even when mortally wounded. The flamethrower was essential. Nothing else could clear the fortifications. Grenades bounced off concrete walls. Bullets couldn't penetrate gun ports from outside. Artillery fire was ineffective against buried positions. Only the flamethrower's fire could flow into openings, around corners, through ventilation shafts, killing everyone inside and rendering positions untenable. But being a flamethrower operator on Iwo Jima meant being a marked man. The Japanese concentrated fire on flamethrower operators, knowing they were the key weapon against fortifications. Williams' fellow operators were being killed at terrible rates. Of the 6 men in his demolition team, casualties mounted daily. Some were killed outright, others were wounded and evacuated. Williams survived through combination of skill, caution, and profound luck. Then came February 23rd, 1945. The morning began with good news. Marines atop Mount Suribachi raised an American flag, the first enemy territory seized from Japan proper since the war began. Marines across the island saw the flag and cheered, believing it signaled approaching victory. The flag raising would become the most iconic image of World War II, captured by photographer Joe Rosenthal in a photograph that would win the Pulitzer Prize. Williams saw the flag from approximately 1,000 yards away. He celebrated briefly, then returned to the immediate problem. Company C faced a network of reinforced concrete pillboxes blocking their advance. American tanks had tried to clear a path but encountered buried mines and became stuck in the volcanic sand. Infantry couldn't advance without being slaughtered by interlocking machine gun fire. The company was pinned down, taking casualties, unable to move forward or retreat. Williams's company commander surveyed the situation grimly. 7 pillboxes in mutually supporting positions. Each pillbox housed several Japanese soldiers with machine guns, grenades, and small arms. The positions were sited for maximum defensive advantage, covering all approaches with interlocking fire. Clearing them would require someone to approach each pillbox individually with a flamethrower while under fire from all 7 positions simultaneously. It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. The company commander asked for volunteers. Hershel Williams said 5 words that would define the rest of his life. "I'll try." The company commander assigned 4 riflemen to provide covering fire: Private First Class James J. Johnston, Private Clifford A. Langley, Private First Class George B. Julian, and Private First Class Howard S. Terry. These 4 Marines would be responsible for suppressing enemy fire while Williams approached the pillboxes. They would draw enemy attention, making themselves targets so Williams might survive long enough to reach the positions. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Williams strapped on his 70-pound flamethrower, checking the fuel level, compressed nitrogen pressure, and ignition system. Everything functioned properly. He carried 4.5 gallons of fuel, approximately 72 seconds at full flow. He would need to make every burst count. The 4 riflemen took positions, providing overlapping fire on the pillboxes. Williams crouched behind a destroyed tank, studying the terrain between his position and the first pillbox. 50 yards of open ground, no cover. Volcanic sand offering no concealment. He would be completely exposed. Williams took several deep breaths, whispered a prayer, and started crawling forward. Japanese machine guns opened fire immediately. Bullets snapped overhead, ricocheted off volcanic rock, kicked up black sand around him. Williams crawled faster, the flamethrower tanks on his back making movement awkward and exhausting. His covering fire riflemen engaged the pillboxes, their M1 Garand rifles cracking steadily, forcing Japanese gunners to take cover momentarily. Williams reached a slight depression in the ground and paused, gasping. He was perhaps 30 yards from the first pillbox now, close enough to see the concrete structure and the narrow gun port where a Japanese machine gun fired. He could hear Japanese soldiers shouting inside, coordinating their fire, searching for him. He crawled closer. 20 yards, 15 yards. Machine gun fire from other pillboxes tore across his position, but the gunners couldn't depress their weapons enough to hit him now. He was too close. Williams understood this instinctively, the same lesson learned at Guam. Crawling close made you harder to hit. At 10 yards, Williams rose to a crouch and charged the pillbox. The Japanese inside saw him coming. The machine gun swung toward him. Williams pressed the flamethrower trigger, and a stream of burning fuel erupted from the wand, spraying into the pillbox's gun port. The flames rolled inside, expanding in a fireball that consumed oxygen and incinerated everything flammable. The machine gun stopped firing. Smoke poured from the pillbox's openings. Williams could hear screaming inside, but whether from men dying or already dead, he couldn't tell. The position was neutralized. 1 down, 6 remaining. Williams' fuel was partially exhausted. He crawled back toward American lines, unbuckled the flamethrower, and left it behind. He ran to the company command post, grabbed a freshly serviced flamethrower, and returned toward the pillbox network. His 4 riflemen were still firing, suppressing enemy positions, but Williams could see that Private Johnston had been hit. The Marine was down, wounded but alive. Another rifleman moved to help him. That left only 3 men providing covering fire. Williams didn't hesitate. He started crawling toward the second pillbox. The process repeated. Crawl under fire. Find depression or slight rise offering minimal cover. Wait for covering fire to suppress defenders. Crawl closer. Rise to crouching run. Charge the pillbox. Fire burning fuel into openings. Watch flames consume the interior. Hear screaming. Return for another flamethrower. Williams's second attack destroyed 2 more pillboxes. He approached them from an unexpected angle, using terrain for concealment, and fired into ventilation shafts rather than gun ports. The technique worked devastatingly. The flames flowed through internal ventilation, killing everyone inside without giving them an opportunity to return fire. 3 pillboxes destroyed. Williams was exhausted, his uniform soaked with sweat despite the relatively cool February temperature. His hands shook from adrenaline and fatigue. He had been fighting for over an hour, constantly moving, constantly exposed to enemy fire. Bullets had ricocheted off his compressed nitrogen tanks multiple times. One ricochet had torn through his uniform sleeve without touching skin. His survival defied all probability. But 4 pillboxes remained, and his company couldn't advance while they were active. Marines were dying in the volcanic sand, pinned down by fire from positions only Williams could eliminate. He went back for another flamethrower. The 4th pillbox nearly killed him. As Williams approached, a group of Japanese soldiers burst out, bayonets fixed, attempting to kill him before he could fire. Williams reacted instantly, swinging the flamethrower wand toward the charging soldiers and pressing the trigger. Flames engulfed the attackers at point-blank range. They died screaming, their bodies burning as they fell. Williams stood frozen for several seconds, unable to process what he'd just done. Shooting someone with a rifle was abstract, impersonal. Burning men at arm's length while watching them die was viscerally horrifying. He could smell their burning flesh. He could see their faces contorted in agony. He would remember those faces forever. But there was no time for reflection. More pillboxes remained. Williams destroyed his 4th position and returned for yet another flamethrower. By now, he had been fighting for nearly 3 hours. His covering riflemen had all been hit. Private Langley was dead. Private Julian was severely wounded. Private Terry was hit, but still fighting. Williams was essentially alone, attacking heavily fortified positions without effective covering fire. He attacked the 5th pillbox from the rear, crawling through a ravine the Japanese hadn't anticipated. He approached from behind, climbed onto the pillbox roof, found a ventilation pipe, inserted his flamethrower nozzle, and fired directly into the position. The flames killed everyone inside instantly. The 6th pillbox was the most difficult. It was sighted perfectly, covering all approaches, with clear fields of fire in every direction. Williams studied it for several minutes, searching for any weakness, any angle of approach offering survival. He found none. The only way to reach the position was across open ground under direct observation and fire. Williams crawled forward anyway. Machine gun bullets tore through the air around him. Volcanic sand erupted from impacts inches away. He was certain he would be killed, but he kept crawling, the flamethrower impossibly heavy, his muscles screaming with exhaustion, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He reached the pillbox somehow, pressed his flamethrower wand against the gun port, and fired. The flames silenced the machine gun. 6 pillboxes destroyed, 1 remained. Williams' fuel was nearly exhausted again. He crawled back toward American lines for the 6th time, moving mechanically, too exhausted to feel fear or think clearly. He grabbed his 6th flamethrower and turned back toward the final pillbox. This position was the strongest, the command post for the entire defensive network, larger than the others, with multiple firing positions and reinforced construction. Destroying it would require perfect technique and considerable luck. Williams had little of either remaining. He approached from an angle providing minimal concealment, using a destroyed Japanese artillery piece for cover during the final approach. The pillbox defenders saw him coming and concentrated fire on his position. Williams felt bullets impact the ground around him, felt shrapnel cut through his uniform, felt volcanic sand splash across his face from near misses. At 15 yards, he rose to a crouching run and charged directly at the pillbox, firing his flamethrower continuously, spraying flames across the gun ports and any opening he could identify. The fuel exhausted quickly, but the damage was done. Fire rolled into the position, silencing its weapons, killing its defenders. 7 pillboxes destroyed. The path was clear. Company C could advance. Williams stood in the volcanic sand, surrounded by smoke from burning pillboxes, his flamethrower fuel completely exhausted, his uniform torn and filthy, his body shaking with exhaustion and delayed shock. He had fought continuously for approximately 4 hours, destroyed 7 reinforced concrete pillboxes single-handedly, used 6 different flamethrowers, made countless trips through enemy fire to resupply, and survived despite probability suggesting he should have died in the first 5 minutes. His company commander approached, unable to speak. Other Marines emerged from cover and stared at Williams with expressions mixing awe, gratitude, and disbelief. What they had just witnessed seemed impossible. One man, alone for most of the engagement, destroying an entire fortified position network that had stopped tanks and pinned down the entire company. Williams collapsed. Medical corpsmen checked him for wounds and found nothing serious. Cuts and abrasions from shrapnel and volcanic rock, burns on his hands from handling hot equipment, profound exhaustion, but no life-threatening injuries. His survival was miraculous. Company C advanced through the cleared positions, moving forward across territory that would have cost hundreds of casualties without Williams' actions. The advance continued for several more hours before consolidating positions for the night. Williams barely remembered the rest of that day. Someone gave him food. Someone gave him water. Someone told him to rest. He lay in a shell crater, too exhausted to sleep, replaying the battle in his mind, seeing the burning faces of men he'd killed, hearing their screams, wondering how he'd survived. The battle for Iwo Jima continued for another month. Williams fought through the rest of the campaign, participating in numerous attacks, performing his flamethrower operator duties with the same courage and skill he'd demonstrated on February 23rd. On March 6, 1945, he was wounded by Japanese shrapnel during a mortar attack. The wounds were painful but not life-threatening. Medical staff evacuated him from Iwo Jima to a hospital ship for treatment. His war was over. He had survived. While Williams recovered from his wounds, officers compiled witness statements documenting his actions on February 23rd. The 4 riflemen who had provided covering fire all submitted detailed accounts. Other Marines who had observed the battle provided corroborating testimony. Company commanders reviewed the statements and photographs of the destroyed pillboxes. The conclusion was unanimous. Corporal Hershel Williams had performed one of the most extraordinary individual combat actions in Marine Corps history. His company commander initiated paperwork recommending Williams for the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration for valor in combat. The recommendation traveled up the chain of command: battalion, regiment, division, corps, Marine Corps headquarters. At each level, officers reviewed the evidence and concurred. Williams's actions clearly met the criteria for the Medal of Honor: conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. On October 5, 1945, 2 months after Japan's surrender, Corporal Hershel Woodrow Williams stood in the White House wearing his dress blue uniform, finally getting to wear the magnificent outfit that had inspired his enlistment 3 years earlier. President Harry S. Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Williams' neck and shook his hand firmly. "I'm proud of you," Truman said. "You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." Williams barely heard the words. He was thinking about the Marines who hadn't come home, the riflemen who had covered his advance. Private Langley, killed, providing covering fire. The hundreds of other Marines killed at Iwo Jima, the thousands killed across the Pacific. He felt like a fraud accepting the nation's highest honor when better men had died. But Truman seemed to understand. The president had served in World War I and understood combat. He knew that survivors carried guilt, that decorated heroes often felt undeserving. Truman's handshake was firm, and his eyes conveyed respect not just for Williams's courage, but for his obvious humility. After the ceremony, Williams returned to West Virginia. He was 22 years old, a Medal of Honor recipient, a national hero. Quiet Dell organized a parade. Fairmont held a ceremony. Local newspapers covered his homecoming. Everyone wanted to shake his hand, hear his story, thank him for his service. Williams found the attention overwhelming and uncomfortable. He hadn't fought for glory or recognition. He'd simply done his duty as he understood it. The Marines beside him had done the same. Many had died doing so. Why should he receive special recognition for surviving? The psychological aftermath of combat was severe. Williams struggled with what would later be called post-traumatic stress disorder, though the term didn't exist in 1945. He experienced nightmares repeatedly, seeing burning faces, hearing screams, reliving February 23rd in vivid detail. He woke up gasping, covered in sweat, unable to distinguish memory from present reality. He dealt with overwhelming guilt. Why had he survived when so many others died? What made his life more valuable than Private Langley's? Why had bullets missed him when they'd found other Marines just as brave, just as deserving of survival? The questions had no answers but demanded attention nonetheless. Williams began drinking heavily at the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post, seeking alcohol-induced numbness to replace emotional pain. He functioned adequately, but those close to him recognized the signs of a man carrying unbearable psychological weight. The war was over. Williams had come home. But part of him remained on Iwo Jima, burning alive in those pillboxes, forever screaming. The drinking and nightmares continued for years. Williams married Ruby Meredith in October 1945, shortly after receiving his Medal of Honor. They had 2 daughters and built a life together, but Ruby understood her husband carried wounds invisible to others. She was patient, supportive, and never pressed him to discuss experiences he couldn't articulate. Williams worked various jobs. He served in the Marine Corps Reserve, eventually retiring as Chief Warrant Officer 4 in 1969 after 20 years total service. He worked for the Veterans Administration as a Veterans Service Representative for 33 years, helping other veterans navigate bureaucracy and access benefits. The work was meaningful, allowing him to continue serving those who had served. But the psychological burden remained until 1962. That year, Williams experienced religious renewal through the Methodist Church. His faith provided context for his survival and purpose for his future. He began to understand that perhaps he'd survived not through luck, but because he had work remaining. Perhaps his purpose was helping others, serving Gold Star families, ensuring that Americans never forgot those who had sacrificed everything. His faith didn't eliminate memories or erase nightmares completely, but it provided framework for processing them, for understanding that carrying survivors' guilt honored the dead rather than dishonored them. Williams became a lay speaker for the Methodist Church and served as national chaplain of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society for over 30 years. In 2010, Williams founded the Hershel Williams Medal of Honor Foundation, dedicated to honoring Gold Star families, the families of service members killed in action. The inspiration came directly from his teenage experience delivering Western Union telegrams in Fairmont, seeing families destroyed by news of loved ones' deaths. The foundation worked to establish Gold Star families' memorial monuments across all 50 states. These monuments honored not just fallen service members but their families who carried the burden of loss forever. By Williams' death in 2022, over 100 monuments had been established with additional projects underway. Williams spent his final decades as an ambassador for his generation. He spoke at schools, veterans events, and military ceremonies. He shared his story not to glorify war but to honor those who fought. His message emphasized duty, courage, and remembrance. He told students that freedom required sacrifice, that some gave everything defending principles greater than individual life. His humility remained absolute. When praised for his heroism, Williams redirected credit. "The real heroes are the Marines who didn't come home," he would say. "I was just doing my job. They gave everything." The years between 1945 and 2022 witnessed America's transformation from wartime superpower to modern global hegemon. Hershel Williams lived through every phase of that transformation, watching his country change while working quietly to ensure Americans never forgot the price paid for that change. After retiring from the Veterans Administration in 1979, Williams remained active in veterans affairs. He served on West Virginia's Governor's Military Advisory Board. He spoke at schools, explaining World War II to generations born decades after the conflict ended. He attended veterans events across the country, representing his generation with dignity and humility. Williams remarried in 1993 to Frances Duman, a widow who understood the challenges of living with a combat veteran. Frances provided companionship and support through Williams' final decades, caring for him as his health gradually declined. She understood that his nightmares never completely disappeared, that certain sounds or smells could trigger memories of Iwo Jima, that he carried psychological wounds no Medal of Honor could heal. The Woody Williams Foundation became Williams's most important legacy. By 2022, the foundation had established over 100 Gold Star families memorial monuments across all 50 states, with approximately 70 additional monuments in development. Each monument honored not just fallen service members but the families left behind, the mothers and fathers and children who carried grief forever. Williams attended as many monument dedications as his health permitted. He would speak briefly, reminding attendees that Gold Star families represented the ultimate sacrifice. Their loved ones had given their lives. The families gave their futures, living every remaining day with absence where presence should be. America owed them recognition, respect, and remembrance. His words were simple but profound, delivered with conviction born from delivering Western Union telegrams as a teenager and watching families collapse from grief. As Williams aged, his status as the last surviving World War II Medal of Honor recipient brought increasing attention. By 2015, as other recipients died, journalists began noting Williams' unique position. He was the final living connection to that particular form of extraordinary valor, the last man who could describe receiving the Medal of Honor from President Truman, the last who remembered World War II firsthand while wearing the nation's highest decoration. Williams accepted the attention with characteristic humility. When interviewed, He redirected focus from himself to others. "The real heroes didn't come home," he would say repeatedly. "I'm just here to represent them." He never claimed special status despite his unique position. He was simply the one who survived, carrying responsibility to speak for those who couldn't. In 2018, the Veterans Administration Medical Center in Huntington, West Virginia, was officially renamed the Hershel Williams VA Medical Center. Williams attended the ceremony, clearly moved by the honor but uncomfortable with the attention. He had worked for the VA for 33 years, helping thousands of veterans access care and benefits. Having a medical center bear his name seemed excessive for simply doing his job. But the naming represented something larger than personal recognition. It symbolized America's commitment to veterans' care, connecting past sacrifice to present responsibility. Every veteran who received treatment at the Williams VA Medical Center would see his name and remember that America's greatest generation had fought to create the world veterans now defended. In 2020, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Hershel Williams, an expeditionary sea base ship, designated ESB-4. Williams attended the commissioning ceremony in Norfolk, Virginia, walking slowly but standing proudly as the ship bearing his name entered active service. The vessel would serve for decades, carrying Marines and equipment to crisis zones worldwide, projecting American power in service of American interests. Williams understood the symbolism. The ship connected World War II's legacy to 21st century missions, linking the flamethrower operator who destroyed 7 pillboxes at Iwo Jima to modern Marines conducting operations he couldn't have imagined. The connection was appropriate. Every generation defended freedom using tools appropriate to their era. The cause remained constant even as methods evolved. As Williams entered his late 90s, his health declined gradually but inevitably. He required supplemental oxygen due to respiratory issues. His mobility decreased, making walking difficult and stairs nearly impossible. His hearing had deteriorated from decades of gunfire and explosions, but his mind remained sharp, his memories clear, his commitment to honoring veterans unwavering. He continued speaking at events when possible, though travel became increasingly difficult. He participated in video interviews and documentary projects, ensuring his experiences were preserved for future generations. He understood that soon no one would remain who remembered World War II firsthand. The responsibility to preserve accurate memory fell to those still capable of providing it. On June 29, 2022, Chief Warrant Officer 4 Hershel Williams died at the Hershel Williams VA Medical Center in Huntington, West Virginia. He was 98 years old, surrounded by family, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. His death marked the end of an era, the final closing of the door on the generation that had fought the greatest conflict in human history. The announcement of his death produced immediate national response. President Joseph Biden issued a statement praising Williams' courage and lifetime of service. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin called Williams an important link to our nation's fight against tyranny in the Second World War. Veterans organizations across America lowered flags to half-staff. News organizations ran obituaries and retrospectives, educating younger Americans about the man and his generation. Williams' family arranged funeral services befitting his status. On July 2nd, his flag-draped casket lay in state at the West Virginia State Capitol in Charleston, where thousands of West Virginians filed past to pay respects. Veterans saluted. Civilians placed hands over hearts. Children asked parents who the man was and why he mattered. Parents explained about World War II, Iwo Jima, and courage beyond comprehension. On July 3rd, a memorial service at the West Virginia Culture Center celebrated Williams's life. Speakers included military leaders, political figures, and Gold Star family members whose loved ones Williams had honored through his foundation work. Senator Joe Manchin announced that Williams would lie in honor at the United States Capitol Rotunda, fulfilling Williams' final wish to represent all World War II Medal of Honor recipients. The announcement received a standing ovation. Williams had lobbied for years that the last surviving World War II Medal of Honor recipient, whoever that might be, should receive this honor. not for personal recognition but as tribute to all who had earned the decoration. The fact that he would be that final recipient was circumstance, not ambition. On July 14, 2022, Hershel Williams became only the 7th private citizen in American history to lie in honor in the United States Capitol Rotunda. The ceremony was formal and moving. Military bearers from all services carried his flag-draped casket up the long staircase at the Capitol's east front. Navy Rear Admiral Margaret Kibben, the House chaplain, delivered an invocation noting that esprit de corps ran deep within Woody's being. Inside the rotunda, Williams' casket rested on a catafalque beneath the Capitol dome. Members of Congress, military leaders, and distinguished guests gathered to pay tribute. Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Williams embodied the best of America. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called the ceremony only a small tribute to someone who has made such impactful contributions to America. The rotunda was then opened to the public. For hours, Americans filed past Williams's casket, paying respects to a man most had never heard of until his death, but whose sacrifice helped create the world they inhabited. Young and old, military and civilian, Americans of every background came to honor Woody Williams and, through him, the 16 million Americans who served in World War II. After the Capitol ceremony, Williams's family held a wreath-laying at the World War II Memorial on the National Mall. The memorial's West Virginia panel listed the names of West Virginians killed in the war, men and women from Williams' home state who had given everything. Williams had survived to tell their stories. Now his story was complete. Williams was buried with full military honors. The ceremony included everything befitting a Medal of Honor recipient: flag-draped casket, military escort, rifle salute, the playing of taps, the folding and presentation of the flag to his family. Fighter aircraft performed a missing man formation flyover, one plane breaking formation and climbing skyward, symbolizing the departed warrior's spirit ascending. The grave marker would note his name, rank, dates, and Medal of Honor. Simple, dignified, equal to every other veteran's marker despite his extraordinary accomplishments. Williams would have appreciated that equality. He'd never considered himself superior to other veterans, never believed his Medal of Honor made him more deserving of respect than any private who'd done his duty and come home. The story of Hershel Williams resonates across generations because it embodies timeless values: duty, courage, humility, service. Williams didn't seek heroism. He sought to serve his country. When circumstances demanded extraordinary action, he provided it without hesitation or expectation of reward. When recognition came, he accepted it gracefully while redirecting credit to others. His path from rejection for being too short to receiving the Medal of Honor demonstrates that courage has nothing to do with physical stature. His survival at Iwo Jima, when probability suggested he should have died, proves that some combination of skill, determination, and fortune allows certain individuals to accomplish impossible tasks. His lifetime of subsequent service shows that true heroism extends beyond single moments of crisis to decades of quiet dedication. Williams represented the best of what journalist Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. That generation didn't consider themselves special or deserving of particular praise. They had simply done what circumstances required. When America faced existential threat from totalitarian powers, they enlisted, fought, and died in numbers beyond modern comprehension. Over 400,000 Americans were killed in World War II. Millions more were wounded physically and psychologically. They paid the price for Allied victory and post-war peace. Williams survived to carry their memory forward. He understood that most World War II veterans wouldn't receive medals or public recognition. They would return home, resume civilian lives, work ordinary jobs, raise families, and die in obscurity. Their sacrifice would be forgotten unless someone remembered them, spoke for them, honored them. Williams accepted that responsibility and fulfilled it for 77 years. The flamethrower Williams carried at Iwo Jima is preserved in museums now, a 70-pound relic of warfare abandoned by modern militaries. The technology is obsolete, but what it represents remains timeless. Soldiers still storm fortified positions, Marines still risk their lives to save comrades. Young Americans still volunteer to defend their country despite knowing war's costs. The pillboxes Williams destroyed are gone now, buried beneath jungle growth or demolished during subsequent construction. The volcanic sand of Iwo Jima has absorbed the blood of thousands and shows no trace of the violence that occurred there. The island itself is restricted territory now, rarely visited, slowly returning to nature, but the memory persists. The iconic photograph of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi remains one of history's most recognizable images, symbolizing American determination and sacrifice. The battle for Iwo Jima represents the brutal close quarters, a combat that characterized the Pacific War, where every position required direct assault against defenders willing to die rather than surrender. Williams' actions on February 23, 1945, exemplified individual initiative that characterized American combat effectiveness throughout the war. When tanks couldn't advance and infantry was pinned down, one Marine with a flamethrower made the difference. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't calculate probability of survival. He saw the problem, volunteered to solve it, and executed with professional competence under conditions that would have paralyzed most men with fear. That willingness to accept personal risk to accomplish collective objectives defined American military success in World War II and subsequent conflicts. Technology and resources matter. Training and logistics matter. But ultimately, wars are won by individuals willing to do impossible things because they're necessary. Williams was one of thousands who demonstrated that willingness. He simply happened to survive, receive recognition, and carry the memory forward. The lessons of Williams' life extend beyond military service. His post-war struggles with post-traumatic stress and eventual recovery through faith demonstrate that psychological wounds require treatment as much as physical injuries. His 33 years helping other veterans access VA care shows that service doesn't end with discharge. His establishment of Gold Star Families Memorial Monuments proves that one person can create meaningful change through sustained commitment. Most importantly, Williams demonstrated that humility and heroism coexist naturally. He never exploited his Medal of Honor for personal gain. He never claimed superior wisdom based on combat experience. He never demanded special treatment because of his decorations. He simply lived quietly, worked diligently, served faithfully, and spoke honestly about what he'd witnessed and who deserved remembrance. In an era of declining World War II memory, when the conflict risks becoming abstract historical event rather than lived experience, Williams served as living connection to that generation's sacrifice. Students could shake his hand and touch someone who had fought at Iwo Jima. Veterans could see his Medal of Honor and understand that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things. Gold Star families could hear him acknowledge their grief and know that America remembered. Now Williams has joined the millions of Americans who served in World War II. The door has closed on that generation. No Medal of Honor recipients from that conflict survive. The youngest World War II veterans are approaching 100 years old. Within a decade, none will remain. Their lived experiences will become history, preserved in recordings and documents but no longer accessible through direct conversation. This makes preserving accurate memory more important than ever. Hollywood produces films about World War II that emphasize action over accuracy. Popular culture remembers the conflict as simple morality tale, with clear heroes and villains. Nuance disappears. Complexity is simplified. Reality is distorted for entertainment. Williams spent his final decades fighting that distortion. He described war honestly. Terrifying, exhausting, traumatic, necessary. He explained that killing enemy soldiers haunted him despite military necessity. He acknowledged that survival involved luck as much as skill. He admitted struggling with post-traumatic stress for decades. He never glamorized combat or suggested that war was glorious adventure, but he also insisted that some causes justify war's costs. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan represented genuine evil requiring military defeat. American intervention in World War II was morally justified and strategically necessary. The men who fought and died prevented totalitarian domination of Europe and Asia. Their sacrifice created the post-war order that allowed unprecedented peace and prosperity. Williams embodied the paradox of the warrior who understands war's horror while acknowledging its occasional necessity. He didn't love combat. He loved the Marines beside him. He didn't seek glory. He sought to protect those who depended on him. He didn't enjoy killing. He accepted it as terrible duty performed to prevent worse outcomes. That mature understanding of war's complexity makes Williams' testimony particularly valuable. He wasn't jingoistic warmonger or traumatized pacifist. He was pragmatic realist who understood that sometimes violence prevents greater violence, that American power serves American interests but also protects allies and deters aggression, that military strength enables diplomatic solutions by making war too costly for potential adversaries. The America that Hershel Williams defended in 1945 was imperfect, with significant domestic problems including racial segregation, limited women's rights, and economic inequality. But it also represented humanity's best hope against totalitarian darkness, American victory in World War II, achieved through contributions from millions of ordinary citizens like Williams, prevented Nazi and Japanese domination, and created conditions for subsequent progress toward America's founding ideals. Williams understood this complexity. He loved his country while acknowledging its flaws. He honored American ideals while recognizing incomplete implementation. He appreciated the opportunities America provided him while working to extend those opportunities to others, particularly through his advocacy for veterans and Gold Star families. On a hillside somewhere, a simple marker notes where Chief Warrant Officer 4 Hershel Woodrow Williams rests. The stone lists his name, rank, dates, and Medal of Honor. It doesn't detail his 7 pillboxes destroyed, his 4 hours of continuous combat, his 6 flamethrowers used, or his 77 years of subsequent service. The stone is understated, appropriate for a man who lived with humility despite extraordinary accomplishment. Nearby rest other veterans. Some died in combat, some lived long lives, some received recognition, some served in obscurity, all wore the uniform, all served their country, all deserve remembrance. Williams would have appreciated resting among them, equal in death regardless of decorations earned in life. The dairy farm in Quiet Dell where Williams was born is gone now, replaced by development and progress. The taxi he drove in Fairmont is rusted metal in some forgotten junkyard. The flamethrower he carried at Iwo Jima is museum artifact behind glass. The Marines who fought beside him are all dead. The Japanese soldiers he killed are buried in distant graves. The pillboxes he destroyed are rubble beneath jungle growth. But the values Williams embodied persist. Courage, duty, humility, service. These values transcend historical moment and remain relevant, regardless of era. Every generation faces challenges requiring sacrifice. Every generation needs individuals willing to serve something greater than self-interest. Every generation must choose between comfortable complacency and difficult duty. Williams made that choice at 19 when he enlisted, despite being rejected once for being too short. He made it again at 21 when he said, "I'll try," instead of letting someone else risk their life. He made it repeatedly over 77 years when he could have coasted on Medal of Honor recognition, but instead chose continued service. His life was a series of choices favoring duty over comfort, others over self, service over recognition. The final lesson of Hershel Williams is simple but profound. Ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when circumstances demand and character sustains. Williams wasn't superhuman. He was farmer's son who drove taxis, enlisted in the Marines, did his duty superbly, survived improbably, and spent 7 decades serving others. Nothing about his background predicted heroism. Nothing about his appearance suggested warrior spirit. Nothing about his demeanor indicated extraordinary courage. But when the moment came, when his company needed someone to attack 7 fortified pillboxes alone under fire, Williams stepped forward. Not because he felt confident, not because he wanted glory, not because he lacked fear. He stepped forward because it needed doing, and he possessed the training and equipment to do it. So he did, with professional competence and natural courage, destroying positions that would have killed hundreds of Americans if left operational. That willingness to do what's necessary regardless of personal cost is the essence of heroism. Williams demonstrated it spectacularly on February 23, 1945. He demonstrated it quietly for 77 subsequent years. The spectacular action earned a Medal of Honor. The quiet service earned something more valuable: the knowledge that he'd honored those who hadn't survived, that he'd served causes greater than himself, that he'd made his brief time on Earth matter. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. Hershel Woodrow Williams, October 2nd, 1923 to June 29th, 2022. Corporal, United States Marine Corps, Medal of Honor recipient, last of his kind. He was, after all, just doing his duty as his country required, which turned out to be extraordinary.